Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining me. My name is Danielle, and it is lovely to be here. As you can see, I look a little bit odd. I will be explaining that in just a moment. I just wanted to introduce the reason, first of all, why I am here. You will see that I am branded to perfection. I am representing and fundraising this week for Epilepsy Action UK. Epilepsy Action have been an invaluable company or charity to me in the last couple of years. In 2019, on the 1st of May, I had my first known tonic-clonic seizure, completely out of the blue. It completely surprised me, and I think just about everybody else in my whole life for several reasons. What I didn't realize was the impact would be so devastating over such a long period of time. That's not something that anybody could ever prepare you for. What I'm doing today and what I'm doing over the next 48 hours is what's called an ambulatory EEG. So for those of you who don't know what an EEG is, they are, in my opinion, the worst medical test that you can get. And I've had lots of them: MRIs, CT scans, ECGs, EEGs. I've had everything going, but these are the worst. Now, what makes, why do you think I'm saying that? They don't hurt. I am not in any physical pain right now. In fact, I just feel a bit silly, so it's embarrassing. But usually what happens is you are in a controlled environment. So you are in a hospital, in a room, usually in the dark, and you are hooked up to 21 electrodes, and you go through a series of experiments. So they will make you, the neuro physician will make you hyperventilate for 2 minutes and will monitor the electric activity going on in your brain as you do these activities. The next thing they will do is sit you in front of a strobe light. So the strobe light will literally be in your face like this, and it'll just, and then it'll get it faster and faster and faster. And for somebody who has photosensitive epilepsy, that can be a really, really scary thing. They also make you do lots of different things. There's lots of different types of EEGs. There are sleep-deprived EEGs where they make you stay awake all night, and then they bring you into hospital, hook you up to something like this, and then try to monitor you as you sleep. So why am I sharing this with you? Well, I thought it's time to break the stigma. For those of you who do know me, or maybe those of you who don't, I am not somebody who sits on the side benches and says nothing. I am not ashamed of having a condition that I didn't want or ask for. I didn't want any of this. I was so happy. My life is never perfect. Everyone always has issues, but health-wise, I was the healthiest I'd been in years. I was, at the time, I was working in a print store, working as a managing editor of a newspaper. I was also running my own business called Mana Cards. I was preaching at women's conferences in churches all over the United Kingdom and in the Republic and the north of Ireland. I spoke everywhere. I was doing everything. I was writing a book. I was just everywhere. In fact, I was even working in a Christian bookshop. So I was working around 6 jobs because I'm so passionate, and I never do anything half-hearted. I do it 100%. And one day I came over to England. I flew over to England, as I had just applied for a job working with an incredible charity that I now work for called United Christian Broadcasters. And I had just discussed all the different details of a contract. It was due to start the job that Saturday or that Monday. So I was flying back home on the Wednesday, and I was walking through Manchester Airport. My mum was with me, just to give you an idea of how much traveling I was doing. In the 5 months leading up to the 1st of May in 2019, I had taken 48 flights on my own, preaching, just going to different locations, 48 flights. So I had traveled a lot, I was doing a lot, but this was the only flight that I wasn't on my own. And it just so happened to be my mum that was with me. And my mum is a nurse. She's the best person ever. I'm always gonna say that. She's called Mary the Legend for a reason. But I just think that God works in incredible ways, you know? So there I am walking through Manchester Airport. When you look back at the details, I see God's fingerprints all over, his protection all over me. Because we were meant to leave UCB to get a train at a certain time. And I just said, I said to the guy that was working there at the time, Mark, I said, Mark, we should probably get an earlier train. The last few times I've been in Manchester Airport, it's been like crazy busy, and it's probably better that we take an earlier train just in case, because the queue was out the door for security. And so we did. We got a train 1 hour earlier, and I didn't think anything of it. So put that on a shelf, right? That's number one. Then the second thing was, I was like, oh, just in case. We got to Manchester Airport, and I said to my mom, well, just in case the queue is really long, we should probably like nip to the ladies. So we did. That was fine. Then we got to security, and the queues weren't as bad as what they were usually. This was pre-COVID, which I don't know if anyone's been through Manchester Airport pre-COVID, but it was crazy in security. And there was like very little queue. And we got the whole way through security in probably around 15 minutes, which was at the time miraculous. And I was going through, I got through, and we were standing at the luggage belt, and I was packing my toiletries into my hold all. And all of a sudden, my heart started to pound. My mum was standing beside me, and I didn't know what was happening. There are no words to describe what a seizure feels like. You can read books, you can read testimonies, you can listen to my story, but unless you've experienced it, you'll never truly understand. To me, in that moment, it felt like I was dying, like this dread just overpowered every single part of my body, and I could barely breathe. And I looked at my mum. I had about a 10-15 second window of warning, and I said, Mommy, I think I'm about to have a panic attack. And my first thought, this might make you laugh, my first thought was, I'm from Northern Ireland. They're probably going to think that I'm up to no good. And I started shaking, and all I remember was I started shaking. Mum said, take deep breaths, you're okay, I'm here. And then I blacked out, and I don't remember anything. The next thing I remember, I was lying on the floor, surrounded by medical screens. And my mum was on the floor beside me, and she had her hands laid on me, and she was praying. My whole family are Christian. We love Jesus. Jesus is amazing. And she's praying for me, and she's declaring God has, a purpose and a life, a plan for my life. And there was another lady beside her who I now know to be called Diane, and she was airport security, and she was praying too. She had her arm around my mum, and she was praying with me. And all I remember was waking up thinking, I have so much left to do. Jesus, please don't take me home. I am not ready to die. I am not ready to die. This is not my time. I've got too much work to do for you, Jesus. I've got too much work to do. And then all of a sudden this, I'm not going to go into the details because it is quite graphic, but just feeling this overwhelming urge to be sick. And the security staff, I cannot speak highly enough of Manchester Airport security staff. And I threw up a lot into those security trays. And there was another guy on the security staff who stood there and fanned me for 45 minutes because my temperature was soaring. And yeah, so when I look back, it was completely terrifying. I couldn't put words together. So the very first thing that I realized was, have I had a stroke? Because I couldn't talk. I couldn't form words. Anytime I tried to talk, it was coming like mumbo jumbo, like, like a toddler talk. I was throwing up everywhere. My head, oh my days, the pain in my head was unbearable. I had chewed through the sides of my cheeks. I had chewed through my tongue. My mouth was bleeding. I'd pulled every muscle in my body. And my mum told me there and then, I was so disorientated, and she said, Danielle, you've just had a seizure. I thought that I'd nearly lost you, and I'd started turning blue because I couldn't breathe. And I had been seizing for 11 minutes. After 5 minutes, if the person who is having a seizure has not regained consciousness, that is classed as a medical emergency. So the fact that I'm alive today is by God's grace alone. Very few people have seizures that last that long and of that intensity and live to tell the tale. God's hand is on my life, and I'm so grateful for that. But as I look back across all of it, I see his protection in that early train, because had I have had that seizure on a train, an express train, I would have died because I wouldn't have had access to the medical care that they have there in Manchester Airport. The second thing was, for the first time ever, I actually went to the ladies, and for those of you who don't know, if you have a tonic-clonic seizure, you are incontinent. So that would have been completely humiliating. The third thing was that there was practically no queue. Had I have seized while being in the queue, I wouldn't have got the medical help that I needed and could have died. The next thing was, my mum was there. Of all the people that you would want to be beside you if something like this was happening and you were close to death, you would want your mommy to be with you, right? But on top of that, the thing that just makes me emotional was that the lady who helped my mum on the floor was a Christian, and she didn't care that all of her colleagues in security were standing there. She got down on the floor beside my mum. She put her arm around my mum, and she prayed for me, and she prayed for my mum. And I believe that collectively, those two mighty women, their intercession saved my life. But also, no one can take your life when it belongs to Jesus, and he ultimately has the say and the power over your life. And death, where is your sting? 3 years later, I'm still here fighting a good fight. So that's my story. That's how this journey began. The 1st of May 2019. I was in hospital for 8 days in Manchester Airport, and I lost a lot. When I mean I lost a lot, I really I lost a lot. They thought I had a brain tumor, which was terrifying. The job that I had actually accepted, was no longer valid, because I needed to drive to Scotland, I needed to go all around the country, I needed to be mobile. But until you are 6 months free of seizures, you can't drive. So I lost my driving license, I lost that job. I'd already packed in my job in preparation for moving to England on that Saturday. But that Saturday, I was in England, but I was a patient in Manchester University Hospital. So I lost that. Then the next thing was, well, what do I do? Like, I had all these plans, and now I've got nothing. I've got no way to support myself. And on top of all of that, I don't even feel safe in my body. And they go into doom and gloom. I don't know if you've ever experienced like having quite an intense medical emergency like that, but consultants have to be the bearers of bad news. They have to, and I really don't envy their job at all. And they have to go into the, like, you could, you're at high risk of death. It's a thing called SUDEP, which is sudden unexplained death in epilepsy patients. I've had, oh my goodness, in the middle of a work day, I've had a call from an epilepsy nurse telling me, listen, because of XYZ, you're high risk, you could die. We need to get your bed fitted with emergency alarms. So if you have a seizure, it will alert somebody. I've been told I need to get anti-suffocation pillows in case I have a seizure and die. I mean, these people, like, they have to they're legally bound to tell you. Of course they are, and it happens. People die every day with epilepsy all over the world. Of course they do. But I am in the way of thinking that, as long as I'm alive, I'm going to give life everything that I have. And I am going to bring joy. I'm going to bring life. I'm going to bring light into darkness. That is everything that I stand for. And to me, epilepsy can only define me as much as I allow it to. So my journey has been a long one. And, nearly 4 years into my journey, my seizures are still not controlled. At the height of my experience, I've had 14 seizures in one day. Now, they weren't tonic-clonic seizures. They were a mixture of absence seizures and focal seizures. So when I say epilepsy, most people will think of the type of seizure I had in the airport, which is where you drop down to the ground and you lose consciousness and you convulse and you shake. To my knowledge, I've only ever had one of those. I can remember as a teenager, experiencing a major trauma, and during the night having an episode that I actually thought I was possessed by a demon, believe it or not. And I remember feeling very disconnected from my body. Looking back now, I see lots of things like that happened that I can now think, that was probably a seizure. But when you don't know a thing, when you don't have the education, you can't put the pieces together and see the whole picture. And in the lead up, into the build up to the 1st of May, I had been having chronic migraines all the time. I was zoning out, which is called an absence seizure. I was zoning out. In one instance, my best friend Zion and I was driving my van, because I used to, back in the day when I could actually drive, I drove a van, the Mana van. And I remember one time, and this is how scary, and this is the reality of it, coming in Northern Ireland up to the roundabout at the Abbey Centre, and just not feeling right. And we were slowing down, and at that time Zion didn't drive, and I said, Zion, something's really, really wrong. And we were coming off the motorway, and I said, something's really not right. I'm going to put the van in first gear and I need you to steer us off this roundabout and pull in the lay-by. And just as I did that, she just went into like auto courage mode. Just as I did that, I had what I now know to be an absent seizure, and she managed to pull over and just put the handbrake on, and we obviously stalled, but we were able to get to safety. And about 20 minutes later, because I didn't know what was wrong with me, I thought, is it my blood sugar? Do I have diabetes? I don't know. Am I stressed out? Am I doing too much? Yeah, and then about 20 minutes later, we were in a shop and the same thing happened. I thought I was going to pass out. Something wasn't right. And the next day I went to the doctor and I explained all this to the doctor. And the doctor said to me, you must be depressed. You're doing all these jobs. You're working 6 different jobs. You must be depressed. I'm going to just prescribe you some antidepressants. And I said, but I'm not depressed. Like, I couldn't be further from a depressed person. Like, I've struggled with depression in my past. I'm not depressed. Like, something's not right with me. And he didn't listen. And so he said, the only way you're leaving this office is if you go to counseling or you go on antidepressants. So I opted for the counseling. And as I walked out to my van, in fact, it was my mom's car I was driving at the time. I went to the wrong car and tried to get in, and because I'd zoned out and I suddenly realized, like, what is wrong with me? I must need counseling because I'm obviously having some sort of a breakdown. 6 months later, you fast forward, I'm lying on the floor in the airport in Manchester. Yeah, it's crazy how these things happen, and it's really scary. So if you're listening and you're resonating with something like that, if you're zoning out and you're thinking there's something like not right with me, you need to speak to a doctor. Because when I look back, I could have killed myself and Zion that day. And I could have killed so many people because I've been driving for a long time. I've driven like all over Europe. I've driven all over like Ireland, UK. Driven lots of people. I love road trips. I constantly went everywhere, and I could have killed someone. If your doctor doesn't listen to you, make them listen to you. That's something I've learned. Fight for your right to be heard for your health. I've had to do that a lot in this journey. In fact, even getting this EEG, I had to do that, believe it or not. That's another story. So yeah, the next 6 months after the first seizure were really difficult. I remember my pastor at the time coming to see me, Pastor Johnny, what a legend. And he sat me down because everyone was in shock, you know, and he sat me down and he said, I think what really got all of us was that you're the type of person, Danielle, who sees a wall and everyone else would try to figure out a way to run around the wall, but you would just run straight at it until the wall would fall over. But this time the wall knocked you out and no one knows what to do. And I'll never forget that. And I laughed because it's true. If you know me, you'll know that's a very accurate description of my personality. But then he said something else profound. And he said, Danielle, the Israelites, when they came to the waters of Mara, not all of them arrived at the same time. Some of them arrived and they tasted the water and seen that it was bitter, because Mara means bitter. So not all of them drank that water at the same time. There were people in the background, because there was a lot of people, and you visualize like a crowd of tens of thousands, if not more, people they've been wandering through the desert, through the wilderness, and they come to this oasis in the desert and they're like, praise God, praise Yahweh. And they come and they drink the water and it's bitter and they're spitting it out and they're like, what, God, why have you done this? Why have you forsaken us? And he said, not all of them drank the water. He said, you can choose to pitch up your camp here at these bitter waters, or you can make a decision to keep walking and look for an oasis. And I really chewed on that for a long time, because, it's important that you process what you're going through, right? It's grief. People assume that grief is just when you lose someone that you love, but grief is like when you lose your independence, when you lose your health, when you lose the feeling of being secure in your own body and your own mind, like of being independent. Oh my goodness, I grieved the loss of my independence. I had to stop doing my business. I had to stop preaching because my speech was so mangled. I couldn't drive. I lost that, my first job, and then I lost my new job, and I'm sitting in the ashes of my life. And I'm like, God, how could you possibly bring something beautiful out of these ashes? And he did. He just didn't do it in the way that I expected him to. For those of you listening who are probably sitting in that same place, he does. 4 years later, little did I know, God had a plan and he had a purpose. Because there's always a purpose in pain, even if you can't see it, and even if you're clouded by bitterness, and even when everything around you just tastes so sour and it's so hard. It's so hard. God always has a purpose. He always has a plan. For me, that looked like working in an incredible team in UCB. And I work in like the best organization ever, and my team are wonderful. We make the Word for Today, we manage the website, we look after all the social media, and we are there to serve the United Kingdom and the nations with the Word of God. How amazing is that? And yet that came out of a place of disappointment and despair and death, pretty much. And God brought resurrection in life, because that's what he does. That's his expertise. So I was diagnosed then. I accepted the job that I now have. And I made plans to move in with one of my friends in UCB called Bex. We signed for a flat that day, under the impression that I was going to get my driving license back because I hadn't had another known seizure, which to me was a tonic-clonic. And that night we'd signed for the flat. We were so excited. I was going home for Christmas. It was on the 10th of December, 2019. And I'd applied for my driving license. And then I'm sitting in my accommodation in England, just about to fly home within a couple of days. And my mum called me and she was crying. And I'm going to try not to cry. And she said, Danielle, I'm really sorry. And I was like, Mommy, what's wrong? And I thought that like someone had died, you know. And she said, Dan, there's a letter that's arrived from the hospital. I'd had an EEG back in Belfast. And it says, Danielle, I'm so sorry. You've been diagnosed with left temporal lobe epilepsy. And I don't think I've ever been so lost for words. It completely knocked me for six. I won't tell you the words that I said because they weren't very holy. But I found out that I had epilepsy by a letter. And at the end of that letter was a prescription for a drug called lamotrigine. And I was told to just start taking it. With no consultation, with no information at all. I had no input from any consultants, because the neurology in Northern Ireland is an absolute nightmare. It's really not good. And 1 in every 83 people in Northern Ireland have epilepsy. It's the highest ranked place in the United Kingdom for people with epilepsy. And yet it's the most understaffed department, one of the most understaffed. So I started taking these tablets and I had no idea what they were. And I had nowhere to turn to. And then I Googled epilepsy and I found Epilepsy Action. And I pretty much read everything on their entire website. I am like a sponge, so I just absorbed everything. I ordered every flyer, every leaflet. I looked into everything that I possibly could, went into all the forums. I mean, I was their number one customer, truly. And I tried to wrap my head around this, and I just couldn't. And so I thought, what am I going to do? And I called Bex and I said, Bex, I'm so sorry, but this is what's happened. And like, I can't expect you to look after me. Like, I don't even know what this is going to mean for me. I thought I'm going to lose my job again. I've just got my dream job working in like a marketing manager. Like, what am I going to do, Lord? Like, you give and you take away, and I will thank you. And I am grateful for everything always. But Lord, why me? I just like, give me a break, you know? And just like that moment that I had in the ambulance from the airport, like, Lord, if I can't thank you in this moment, I don't know if I'll ever be able to thank you again. And so I chose to thank him, even when I didn't feel it, because sometimes praise is a broken sacrifice. And I was really broken that day. And I thought I'd lost everything all over again. And I went home for Christmas, and Bex just laughed at me and said, don't be stupid. I love you. Of course you'll be fine. I'll look after you. Sure, if you smack, we called it smacking out. No disrespect to anybody who is epileptic and is listening to this, but we have humor. We had humor, should I say, when we lived together. And she's like, it'll be fine. We'll just make a joke about it. And we did. And then I moved to England officially in January 2020. And then lockdown happened. And I had no way of getting home to my family. And it was just me and Bex. And we learned about epilepsy. And we figured it out. I had 14 seizures in one day in work, triggered by lights. And so I was fast-tracked through neurology in Stoke. And I couldn't speak high enough. Stoke, the Royal Stoke Hospital, are absolutely incredible. And the epilepsy nurse team there, and my neurologist, unbelievable, absolutely unbelievable. The care that I've received is just next to none. And they helped me through and have continued and are still helping me through the most difficult season of my life. And that is really saying something, because I've lived through a lot of really hard things. And yeah, God's good. God's still on the throne. All this time later, 4 years later, in fact, that same year in 2020 in September, on the 3rd of September, I met my husband. And we celebrated our first wedding anniversary last Saturday. And he was God's grace to me in that season, huh? He taught me to stop being scared of my body. So they tell you things like you can't have a bath, and I love baths. You're not allowed to swim, and I'm like a fish. I love swimming. I've spent oh my goodness, I spent years living in Greece, snorkeling and swimming. I've been swimming since I was a baby. I just love swimming. So I couldn't do that. I wasn't allowed to go out for walks on my own, so I had to always drop a pin to Beck so she knew where I was. I wasn't allowed to walk near open water. I wasn't allowed to be unaccompanied for 24 hours. Like, I had to always be around someone because I was at risk of sudden death all the time. So you put yourself in that position. Imagine what that's like. It's terrifying. It's really, 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 really scary. And then Chris came along and he taught me to stop being scared of what these people were saying to me and to start listening to what God says about me and who God's created me to be. And because of him, I started to say no to the doctors when it came to the medication. They kept increasing it, and I knew that it was having an adverse reaction. And so I started saying no and taking control of my seizure medication. And I had a massive reaction to lamotrigine. And it was really bad. It was really, 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 it got ugly. And so they started me on a different one because it started to go toxic. We had to have a contingency plan and work in place just in case I had to take a couple of months off. I started on a new drug called Keppra, and praise God, like it really, really helps. And I'm now on the maximum dose of that, and I'm still having seizures. So there's lots of different things that can trigger seizures, lots and lots of different things. I'm not going to really get into that. I want to kind of tell my story because I think that's what's important. Because this is why I'm fundraising. This is why I'm wearing this stupid thing. It's because I want to get control over my seizures. I want to be on the right type of medication. And a couple of months ago, the frequency of my seizures started to increase. Due to lots of different things, stress, lighting, hormones, everything can have an impact. Even your diet, sleep deprivation, like everything can have an impact on your seizure control. And I contacted my neurologist, and they all advised me, like, I had to take a month off work, which I've never done. I've had a job since I was 15 years old. I've never taken that amount of time off work ever. So that was like a huge thing for me to like not work and try to learn how to speak and understand and interpret the language of my own body. And so they put me forward for what I'm now wearing. It's making me look like a space cadet. I don't know if you can see it. It's called an ambulatory EEG. So what this is I've actually got, this is a different type of one from the ones I've experienced before. This one has 25 electrodes. So you'll see these little sticky things here. They're all through my hair, which I'm not going to try and move because they're all like super glued. I don't know if you can see the super glue. It's all underneath. And you'll see here, I'm like a cyborg. I've got my little pack to my left. Here, my little pack that I have to bring around with me. It's also video monitored, so I've got a video camcorder sitting right beside me. Yes, it is also as I sleep tonight. I don't know how I'm going to sleep with this on my head. I also have to leave the camera on while I sleep. So Chris is sleeping on the floor because he does not want to be in this. The reason that we're doing all of this is because I've actually started having seizures in my sleep, and they're the very, very dangerous ones that can kill you quite quickly. And it was Christopher that noticed that first because I started kicking him in my sleep. Obviously, I didn't know, but he told me, I think he had a seizure in your sleep. And I was like, you know, being an arrogant wife, thinking, you don't know anything. You know, Christopher, I didn't have a seizure in my sleep. I don't get those. I just have the focal seizures, you know, where you zone out and you just look a bit crazy. But then I think it was like maybe a week later, I woke up and I knew something wasn't right. I like jolted awake and couldn't really breathe right. And then I tried to stand up and my balance was off. I was walking diagonal. I nearly fell over. I felt like I was completely drunk, like, and it was about 7 a.m. It took me ages to even get down the stairs just to lie down flat. I think it took me around an hour, maybe 2 hours to recover. And then I had a migraine for a good week afterwards. More recently, I was in Cyprus on our honeymoon, and I had a cluster of focal seizures that lasted for 40 minutes, and then had a migraine for 3 weeks that only broke last week. So like the impacts of epilepsy and seizures are awful. They are awful. There's no way around that. But I think by far the worst thing about epilepsy isn't the seizures. People think it is. But it's not. The worst thing about epilepsy is the medication. And that's not something people tell you about, you know. I'm on year 4 now and my meds still aren't right. And I am a powerful believer in prayer. I absolutely know that God can and will heal me, but I don't know that I have the assurance of that this side of heaven. And you know what? That's controversial in the church. But I have absolute faith that he can. And if he does, hallelujah. But if he doesn't, I will testify to the grace, the perseverance, the endurance, and the strength that he's given me to be alive today and to overcome everything that I have done. Because one day, back in 2021, Bex was in work on air because she's a radio presenter. And I was alone in the house on my own. And I don't even know, I had a lot of focal seizures, and I wasn't gaining consciousness. So I was like zoning in and out, zoning in and out, zoning in and out. And I had this really raw moment with God. And I thought, this is it, you know, I'm gonna die. This is it. Jesus, I'm gonna come home today. And I have never in all my life experienced the presence of God that I did that day, lying on the floor in recovery position on my own on the carpet. It was like the room was filled with angels. And I just felt the comfort and the embrace of God's love, lying in recovery position, thinking, this is it, I'm going to die. And no one was answering their phone. I eventually got through to Zion, and she just stayed on the phone with me. That's the best thing you can do with someone, especially if it's not like tonic-clonic and they're aware, because a focal aware seizure means that the person doesn't lose consciousness, but you're fully aware that you're having a seizure. So you can feel, it's really weird, you can feel the electrical currents zapping around your brain. And your speech goes, your hearing, sometimes like my hearing goes, I go deaf, sometimes my eyes get blurry, I have vertigo, other times, like, I mean, it's awful. Sometimes I've had myoclonic seizures, which if you don't know what that is, it's where you get like a sudden pulse of electricity through a part of your brain that's like controls your motor function. One example of this was when I was at work, and a guy on my team called Jack, all of a sudden, he was sitting beside me to my left, and all of a sudden I had a myoclonic seizure, and my left arm just shut it out, and I nearly punched him. And he was like, whoa. And I was like, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. I don't know what happened. I must have had a myoclonic seizure. So like, if you see people doing crazy weird things like that, it's not their fault. Like, there is no control. I have no control over my body, and that's totally terrifying. That's totally terrifying. But the scariest thing of it all is the medication and getting the meds right. So right now, these 25 electrodes, and I'm also getting my heart monitored here, as you can see, and filmed, is trying to monitor the electrical activity that's going through my brain for 48 hours. And I want to do something. I want to pay it forward, and I want to support other people out there who are just beginning the journey that I have 4 years in now, by supporting Epilepsy Action. If you would like to donate, I would be really grateful, because for me, it's like, this has meaning and this has purpose, and we can make a difference to people. I mean, I work for a charity. It's easy to say that, you know, I am driven by inspiration. I love being able to help people, but this is different. This is so personal, because this isn't just about people that know Jesus. This is about people all across the United Kingdom. 1 in every 100 people are diagnosed with epilepsy. Someone, without even saying who it is, somebody in my very close family was recently diagnosed with epilepsy. And I want to normalize this for them. And I want them to grow up knowing that they don't need to be ashamed, that they don't need to be scared, that these things happen. And it's not a punishment from God. That God loves us as we are, where we are at all times, and that he's with us, not just in the pulpits when you're preaching, but he's there in the gutter when you're lying on the floor in recovery position, thinking that you're going to be promoted to heaven within minutes. I've met Jesus there more than I ever did in the hundreds of churches that I've spoke at. Jesus is with you in the gutters. And I just want to thank all of you for spending the time to sit here and listen to my story. Please, 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 if you can, donate here. If you take your phone, unless you're watching on your phone, if you take your phone, scan this QR code, and it will take you to my Just Giving page. The URL should also be in the description below. So I think it's justgiving.com/page/epibrain, no shame, because there is now no condemnation for those who are in Christ Jesus. And those who look upon the Lord, their faces are radiant and are not covered in shame. And I am not ashamed. I am not ashamed. God is always good. So thank you for listening. Tune in tomorrow. I hope to tackle something that I feel incredibly passionate about, which is the church needing to do better when it comes to people that struggle with disabilities and with long-term health conditions or mental health issues. What does Jesus say about that? Where is Jesus when you're diagnosed with things that you can't control? Because I think we need to do a lot better. I think we need to do a lot better. And I also think that I have a very unique input into this discussion because I have been miraculously healed of 4 incurable diseases. If you want to know more about that, I will post the link on to this feed. But I'm also experiencing God's miraculous healing through medication and through neurologists and through medical specialists. That does not make me any less of a Christian. And I want to unpack that. And I have potentially got a special guest lined up to help me. So thank you so much for joining. I hope to come online tomorrow at roughly around the same time, around 7-ish, with my special guest. Until then, please open your purses, be generous, donate to Epilepsy Action. They are changing lives all over the UK, and they are making what seems like the end of the world for people like me. They're making it seem possible. Thank you so much for joining me. I hope you have a wonderful night. May God bless you and keep you and cause his face to shine upon you and be gracious unto you. Bye.